I should also
Live streaming is on.
I should also say this that this is most of the things that I'm going to be talking until the grid section is going to be like very brief. All right. So I will start by introducing myself. My name is Nelson. My full name is Chukwuez Gobara. All right. Yeah. So I'll be taking this grid session, CSS session today. All right. So yeah. So the introduction. So this is supposed to be a me and you introduction. All right. So, but the you is optional. All right. Please, can you see my screen? Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah, I can say.
Okay.
Yes.
So yeah, so the U is optional. So we don't have enough time. Do we have time for that introduction? No. So I'm going to skip it. So and then we'll come to okay. So what is CSS layout? Okay. So first of all, the topic today is actually CSS grid. All right, but I just want to just kind of flash our minds back to what's even grid, what is grid. All right, and this is just an option for when you're talking about CSS layout. All right, so layout is like a way that you position your HTML elements. All right, so I will assume that we all know what HTML element is and HTML components, all right, tags and all that. All right. So okay, so first thing first, you've learned all these tags. You know how to implement it, how to use it, all right, what each of those does, all right. Now the next thing is that okay, I have these tags, I want to position it in a kind of way. All right, I want this to be here, this to be here, I want this to be at the top right, middle bottom, whatever. All right. Yeah, so that is now you're talking about layouting. So you want to lay out the components. All right, so that is what layout is. And in CSS we have different techniques for doing layouting. All right, call it options. All right, so and here I've actually listed it in what I say their order of inconvenience. So this is my opinion. All right, so we have remember our target here is grid. All right, so I just want us to like go from the how this whole thing evolved. Okay, so first of all we have the normal flow. All right, we have table layouts, positioning, floats, flex boss, and then grid. All right, so now these are options that you have. All right, the first two uh, is actually a default for HTML. So HTML is different from CSS. CSS is just like the magic wand, all right, the painter, all right, just styling the HTML. HTML is the structure, all right, the skeleton. So table and the normal flow is actually HTML. By normal flow, I mean I'm referring to the default thing that happens when you put that your H tag, a tag, HTML, like your basic, without adding CSS. What happens? What do you see? That's what I mean by normal flow, right? And now we're talking about inline elements and block elements, right? So these are two types of elements when it comes to layouting, like default layout, all right? So inline elements uh, are those elements like that they're kind of stay in the same line, you know. So when you introduce it in the page, they tend to stick to the next. They tend to stick to the next element, all right, that they found in the page, all right, in a horizontal manner, and then subsequent elements is going to like stack around them, all right. So that's inline element. But block elements, when you introduce them in the page, they tend to take their own line, their own space. They don't share it with anybody. All right. So you introduce the page in a content, they tend to occupy the entire space. The next element that is coming after them is going to go to the next line. Them themselves, they are going to go to the next line. All right. So if I have A, B, C, and B is a block element, A is going to be above B and C is going to be below B. All right. So that's block elements. All right. So that's a default one. And then we have table layout. So now in the olden days, very far back away, all right, people tends to, so of course, table
I think there's an issue with his network. Are you all there? Hello.
Yeah, I can
Yes,
confirm that.
yes, yes,
Yes.
yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, when he gets back, I think he's having a network issue. If you want to ask question, you can also like, excuse yourself and ask. I would, except he says it's not okay with him. Okay.
Hello, guys. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Oh, sorry. So Nigeria happened here. Nigeria happened. Oh, sorry.
I guess that's much.
So yeah, um, so I'm going to um, sorry, I will not bore you guys for long. So let me share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen now again? Hello, can you see my screen now? Hello.
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Oh, okay, you can see my presentation, right?
Yes, CSS
Oh,
layout techniques.
okay. So so talking about table, right? So table was the first one of the ways that, of course, to do layouting. All right. Now, this is now where things start getting interesting. All right. So each of these options here, you can actually use it to lay out comfortably. All right. Like I mentioned, I have organized this in their order of inconvenience. All right. So I can decide to do layouting with table and do layouting with positioning, flexible. So it's all by choice. All right. But now table is not advised. It's not meant for layouting. So it's actually a bad practice. So um, actually, you're not meant to use table for your layouting. But can you do use table to do layout, any layout? Yes, you can. All right. To set your grids. Oh, yes, you can. Now, that's for table. And then we have now move then CSS 3. Now, CSS. Now, so remember, table is without CSS. Now, CSS has its own ways of doing layouting. And that's first thing is positioning. All right. And then we have floats, we have flexbox, and then grid. Now, positioning wasn't actually created for layouting, even though you can use it. Positioning is meant for you to move things around. All right, like have kind of a fine grain of your elements, like shift it like a little bit, move it, like space it, and all that. But the idea is not really on this. So the actual stuff that CSS has for positioning is actually floats. That's where positioning, repositioning, real layouting actually started in CSS. All right, floats. And this is now using floats and clear float and the rest. All right, to achieve your float layouting. All right, this you can use comfortably. Like I don't see any layout in the world that you cannot, or as far as web is concerned, that you cannot use any of these techniques here to achieve. All right. Remember, I told you it's preference. All right. Now, that's float. Now, but developers and humans, we're always looking for a way to make life easier and better and all that. So with floats, if you want to achieve responsiveness, you still have to like write several media queries, do this and that and all that. All right. Now, the guys, they were looking for a way to make life easier, and then that's where Flexbox now comes into the picture. All right, so Flexbox is meant to simplify developers' journey when it comes to layouting in CSS. All right, so with Flexbox, there are some responsiveness that you don't really, even though you can do it when you are doing using other alternatives. With Flexbox, you don't need to like do much, right, to achieve some basic stuffs. All right, so Flexbox was like the magic wand, all right. Yeah, like when it was introduced back then in 2009, like everybody was happy. Yeah, so we are going to finally be doing this and all that. It was like the end, but then Flexbox has this limitation as well as every single one of it here. So each of it has its cons and pros. We may not be discussing each of them here because it's actually out of the scope of this session. All right. So Flexbox has its pros, which you are still going to look at when we come to like the difference between Flexbox and Grid. All right. Just we'll highlight it. Now, and that is where, of course, people are still awake. People are always trying to like refine methodologies, all right, and trying to come up with new ways of doing things. And that's where grid now comes in. Is grid the almighty? I won't say
So
yes.
sorry. So sorry. I guess.
Okay, continue. Continue. Hello? So sorry, so sorry. I lost you, or you lost me. That one. Hello, guys, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I don't
Yes,
know.
yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. So someone actually was trying to. I think someone was asking a question.
I'm starting to think maybe the person audio was on and they did
Okay,
not.
was actually was not referring to me. Maybe the person did not.
Yeah, I would think
Oh,
so.
okay. So guys, please call my
Yeah,
attention.
I guess you're reading my.
Oh, it's network. It's network problem.
Thank you.
Oh, I think he sent a message. His question is in the message box. So
Oh,
he
okay.
asked the first question he says, how do you know when to use Flexbox versus Grid?
Okay. Um.
Yes,
I'll,
I have those questions. I was I was hoping to use the message section as a memo so that I don't
okay.
forget the questions because I know that definitely you will probably touch on these.
Okay,
Okay.
good.
So it seems when I leave, it sends. So
Yeah,
like
but
when I leave
it's
the
Okay.
still
chat,
here
so
for
it
it's still here
sends.
for us anyways.
Okay. So
Yeah,
IK,
yeah,
we
yeah.
prepared. Do you want us to have look at this question now, or maybe we can take care
Yeah,
of it?
I
Which
think for when to use grid and flex boss, we can have that like after we have actually like discuss the difference between flex and grid, right? Yeah, I
yeah.
think you
Okay.
actually like discuss soon. And
Yeah.
then for the other one, if relative versus absolute position,
Okay.
if they are
Okay. We can
obsolete,
talk about
you can address that now. Yeah, I think
Oh,
so.
okay, okay. So, about relative and absolute positioning, you're talking about one of the ways of doing layout, all right? So, and that's the positioning. That's the third point in this layout techniques, all right? So, now, relative and absolute. So, I'll give you an instance. So, let's say, um, so you use relative positioning when you want to like position things. So okay, first of all, positioning by default, every element has static positioning. All right. Now, when you introduce relative to an element, what happens is that that element you kind of signal the element to be aware that it has positioning set. All right. So the element maintains the position. Nothing changed. Like visually, you're not going to see any change. All right. But what happens is that that element behind the scene, all right, it's kind of like picture it this way. It creates a space, all right, for that element, meaning that you can now apply your helpers, which is left, right, all right, top, bottom, all right, to that particular element. And that element is going to move in relative to the position, the actual position it was. All right. So you are going to, so if you move it, if you put apply left, all right, you're going to see that element move, but that space is still going to be there, the hollow space, like the space it was occupying, the white space, or whatever the background of the parent is. You're going to see it there. All right. So it's now aware, is aware. So putting relative there is the component is aware. Now, absolute is positioning is almost the same as fixed positioning, all right, that they are going to move out of the flow, the flow of the components, all right, the component flow, meaning that that space that you're seeing in the case for relative is not going to be there, all right. That space, the element is going to actually be pulled out from the flow, from the page. Imagine that it was pulled out from the page, all right. Then what happens is that let's say we have elements A, B, C, all right, all floating horizontally, all right, left. Now, if you put B, if you put relative, sorry, absolute position to B, all right, what happens is that B is going to move out of the flow, all right, and then A and B is going to stack together. Just imagine that is a force, all right. It's going to stack together, and then now where is B going to go to? This is now where it now depends on what the parents of ABC or all right or parents of B is. In this case, is one container containing ABC, all right. So whatever parent that has a position other than static is where it's going to like go, all right. So let's assume that we have a container containing ABC. All right, let's call that container C. Sorry, let's call that container C. No, let's call it D. All right. So D is wrapping ABC. Now we put absolute position to B. All right. Remember, each of them are all child or children or descendants of the body tag. All right. The body is their descendants, the document. All right. Now, if I set if now see what happens. So if I set absolute to B, component B, that component is going to by default go and stay at the body, that's the parent. You understand, the parent, except I put a position, whether relative or whatever position that is not the default, which is static. Now it's going to, that element is going to stay at the parent of B, which is D. All right, D is the wrapper. All right. Do I have time to do this? Maybe I think we were talking abstracts, though we are going to practicalize it here. But
Yeah, yeah.
relative, remember I said relative is it just triggers that guy like, oh hey, you are position, you have position, so stay here, don't go anywhere. So even if we are moving you around, just move in relative to this your space, all right. Whereas absolute is, man, we are pulling you out of this place, all right. But where you're going to go to depends on where your parent or your ancestors, your immediate ancestor that has a position other than static, that's where you're going to, all right. So this
Okay.
once you know position in absolute and relative, man, you can do wonders, all right. So it has, so you see that's where you start understanding, like for instance, this chatting, this we're using Google Meet, right? You see that like the way that these guys are positioned, if you understand your absolute and this thing well, you see that there are things here that you can actually do. The name that is positioned, you start noticing that it's actually absolute and all that you get, and the icons and all that. But we are going to if does that make sense? Maybe an example is going to explain
Yeah,
further.
it makes sense. And I just want to see this in to see if we're in line, or if I'm in line with you. So
Okay.
if we have, yeah, if we have a div inside another div,
Yes.
and then we position this div to be like, of course they are both children of course the first div is a child of the body tag, right?
Yes.
But
Yes.
the inner div, that is the
Yes.
second, the div within the first one, right? If I
Yes.
position it to be absolute, or rather
Yes.
relative, it
Yes.
is relative to the div, that's the its parent div, right? Not the
Yes.
body.
Exactly. It's relative to the is parent div. Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And now, if let's assume that you have three divs inside as a direct child of that your your outer div, all right. Let's assume that you have three. It has three siblings or three siblings, all right.
Sure.
Now those, and each of them has a position relative. They are also relative to the outer div, or all right, and also relative to their current position. You understand?
Oh, okay. I see. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think this is one thing that confused me with
Mhm.
relative. So is it relative to where it is right now? Like if I'm
Yes,
moving it around, like is it relative? Where I used to have this issue was with the hero
it's
image.
relative to
Those.
where it is right now. It's relative to where it is right now. So if it's at the bottom, because let's assume there are like two divs, you understand, at the left
Yeah.
of that div. All right. So it's relative to its current position. So when you add like say left, all right, the helper
Mm-hmm.
this thing, left, you add two picks, all right, left. It's going to
Yeah.
move, it's not going to
No,
move two picks from the
hang
outer
on.
div. It's going to move two divs from where it is currently, the present position. Two
Makes
picks, all
sense.
right.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank
Hello,
you.
hello. We can hear you. We can hear you. Someone was
Is this network
yelling
from
out.
my side or his side?
Okay. Do you have question? Hello. Okay. So Ejim, is that clear?
Yes, it is. Very clear.
Okay. Okay. Then the other question, just like
Thank you.
IK mentioned, we are going to come back to that later. Yeah. So so let me go back to my. So I don't want this guy to confuse me. So that's why. So I've talked about positioning, then floats, and then flexibles, and then how we got to grid. All right. So grid is not like the Superman, but so far it's like the most recent and the most modern way of doing layouting. Now, don't get me wrong, grid is not, nobody's forcing you to use grid, all right? You can actually do pure CSS layouting with floats, with flexbus, with grid, anything at all that you see that you want to like replicate, you can, the choice is yours. The difference is that with floats, you are going to do more work. With flexbus, with flexbus, you are going to do lesser work. All right. Then with grid, you are going to do a much lesser work. But now the cons is that with flex, you have to start learning new things, new properties. All right. With grid, you have even want to learn more new properties. All right. Because grid is also vast and very of course, in this session, we are not going to be discussing all the properties of grid, all right? But we are going to touch the major, the ones that I feel that are major, all right? That with it, you have the basics that you're going to like use and then do your positioning, all right? Then the rest, you can, the same way that I cannot just in one session teach you about the entire CSS3 um, uh, stuffs, all right? Because like there are several things like animations and all that, you can actually do wonders. All right. So yeah, so with that, we now move to hello. Seems someone
I
was
can hear you.
talking. Oh, okay. Okay. So yeah. So move to grid concepts. So we've established that grid is what so actually that's the topic, all right, for today's session. All right. Please let me know if I need to if there is any scope here that you want me to go back, all right, I can always go back. But our focus is on grid, and that's why I had to like rush all these guys very fast, all right, so that we I don't bore you guys, and I bored you guys, and we get to like play around with this. So we have grid concepts, all right. So we have properties and then helper functions. Um, for now, I think these are like the things that I will be covering here. As we go on, I can. So what's happening is that like there are still some properties that grid and flexbus share in common. All right. So grid and flexbus, they share a lot of properties in common, but flexbus has its own specific properties, whereas grid has its own specific streams of properties. All right, specifically dedicated for grid. All right, but they still share some stuffs in common. Now, this should also go without saying, like let me go back. Permit me to go back. Um, you can actually combine these layouts together in a single project. All right. You can actually combine them. In fact, most of the time you notice that you find yourself doing using one and then using two. Sometimes you find yourself using more than two, three. All right. Yeah, most times you will find yourself using at least two of these in your project, right? Either you're using Flexbox to just do one quick, rendering of one card, one snippet, one just basic stuff, or you understand. So my rule of thumb is I use Flexbox. I use floats a lot, all right, a lot. If I want to start a project now, there is every tendency that I'll use float. If I'm feeling very distant, I'll use Flexbox. But recently I fell in love with grid, all right. So what I do is that I use grid for my basic, just the grid, all right. You can use it for anything, all right. This is opinionated, all right. So I'm just telling you that you can combine these two things and nobody's going to like it's your choice. If these are options there, you can just combine it how you want. So back to grid concept. So in grid we have the same way. If you know, I believe that you guys have an idea of how flexbox work. All right. So flexbox, you have this concept of column and rows. The same thing also in grid. All right. Then you have gaps, you have areas, and all that. All right. We are going to be looking at all those. And then helper functions like repeat, min, max, and all that helps you to like not just to do dry concept. All right. Do not repeat yourself. Like you write smaller codes. All right. So as we are going to see shortly. So flex and grid differences or whatever. Okay, so there could be many, but this is just what I could figure out. All right, and this is just the two. All right, so the difference between flexbox and grid. Remember, I said that there could be many. All right, but these I feel that are the most important ones, the major ones. Is that first of all, flexbox is one dimensional. I will explain, and then grid is two dimensional. All right. Then the second one is that flexbox is content first, whereas layout is grid is layout first. I will also explain. So by one dimensional, okay, I would like to explain this when we get to the example, because explaining it now I would talk too much, and I didn't have a diagram like prepared for this so that I can show you where then when we get to the hands-on we can but permit me to just skip this particular. Okay, I will talk about it a little. So by one dimension I mean, so for flexbox, let's assume that you have three items, all right, that you want to position, you want to lay out, all right. So let's give it item A, B, C, all right. And I in Flexbox I what we call basis, all right. Okay, so and I said that I want I want the items to share 50% of the page, the viewport, all right, the page, all right, screen. Now, what will happen is that for Flex, A and B is going to take the space. They're going to distribute the space, all right, of the screen, the entire row, all right, the entire row. They're going to share it 50-50, all right. Then what happens is that the next, in fact, we can even use this, all right. So assuming that this box here, can you see my mouse, the pointer? So assuming that this box here is the flexbox side, the cell is the first item, then grid is the second item, and then one dimension is the third item. Now you can see that flexbox is here, grid is here. They're taking like 50% of the first row, all right. That's flexbox. Now as just imagine imagine that two-dimensional, this one is not here, this cell, this cell, and this cell is not here. Now I will use it to explain. So flex, boss, and grid is already taking the entire row of the first line. Remember, you set your flex to basics, all right, 50% or whatever, all right. Now, what happens is that this third item, which is one dimensional, for flex, is going to take the entire row of this bottom. So it's going to span from here. It's not even going to stop here. It's going to reach here. That is what we don't want. All right. So we want it to be neat. We don't want it to occupy. Sometimes I want it to occupy the entire bottom row, but in this case now, we don't want it to. But Flex says no. Once I move into the next row, I'm taking the entire, for the fact that you've said this. So it's one dimensional, all right? But for grid, I can actually set the row and the column, all right, in such a way that this third item here is not going to span past this space here, this line. This is where it's going to stay, all right? And that's one of the beauty of and also the confusion of grid, all right? So everything that has good actually has the downside, all right? So, but it's actually a great stuff, all right? Great stuff. That concept alone is actually very powerful, all right? Then the second one is that content first and then layout first. So for Flex, if the content, let's assume that you have one of your items, so you've actually set your grid is actually very fine. You have just the same length of items in each of them, and you set your Flex properties, and it's looking all fine. And then you now go and pour or populate. Remember, all these things that we're talking about, we're just talking about only Flex, pure Flex and grid. With CSS, you can use any of this. Remember, I mentioned you with other combining other CSS, you can actually use each of these to do this. In fact, bringing in JavaScript, you can do wonders. All right, but we're focusing on Flex and grid in their purest form in vanilla. All right. So for Flex, if you now extend that the content of an item is going to like start stretching the rest of the items, whereas grid is not going to, all right? Grid is going to like maintain. Grid is focused on the layout. That layout that you set for me to be, that you want me to be, that is what I'm focused on, all right? I'm not going to look at the content, whether it's shrinking, whether it's going, whether it's drowning. No, that's not what I'm looking at. I'm focused on the layout. So that's the grid. We are going to see all these things. So forget about the talks and plenty talks and grammar. So the next, is hands-on. So we are going to be looking at how this thing works. But before we jump into our code editor, okay, that's the last. Do we have any question so far? And then back to Ike. Ike, is this the okay? There's another question here. Which of them is better? And then which of them is better for responsive design? Please, can you explain further? And then also, Ike, is this the time to attend to these questions, or maybe when we are doing the stuff?
Or let's go more. Let's continue with the lesson. Then we'll try to answer at the end.
Oh, okay. So please confirm you can still see my screen here.
Yeah, I can see. Phone.
Okay. So, oh no. So I'm going to close this guy. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new project. And I'm going to call it CSS grid. Then CSS grid. Then Okay. So um so we have this new project, right? So let's add our CSS. Trust this from author. Yes, let's add our HTML. Let's call it index.html. And then I have style.css. Okay. So basic HTML, blah blah blah. So I have this nice plugin from Emmet that would auto generate all this for me. Yeah. So let's call it this project CSS. Grid. Okay. Title. Of course, you know that title is just shows on the tax bar. Title bar, sorry. Okay, so we have this plain stuff here, and then we need to open this. Now, I want to open this. All right, so the way I will open this is like I could go to the file, and then I'll click on it. Okay, so let me X open. So where I'll open this, I will come here and then I'll double click on this. This opens, right? Yeah. So, but then I don't want to see this. So this is relying on the file system. Again, this is out of the scope, but maybe you just have an idea of what I'm talking about. So we are seeing file dot dot slash slash home, blah, 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 blah. This we don't want, all right? So what I would do is that I would, please, I'm just rushing, all right? So we can come back to this. This now, uh, uh, computer science 101, all right? So we can come back to this about the address now, all that. But then what I would do is that I want to create a server, all right? Pure simple server. And to do that, I use this nice plugin, all right, here called Live Server, all right? There is a plugin from VS Code plugin called Live Server. Yeah, this plugin here. Yeah, so this is the plugin I'm using. So what this plugin does for us is that it helps us, it serves the page for us. All right. So, but what this thing will do is that, yeah, we open this and everything works fine. But at the long run, we start having issues with the path, the file referencing file and all that. And even when you deploy this, your project, you're actually deploying to a remote server, right? That will be served by a web server. The files is going to be served by a web server, right? So at the end of the day, we want to emulate what is going to happen in the remote server, right? So that's why we're using this server. And again, another thing that this guy gives you is what we call hot reload. So I don't want to be doing my modification and come here. You know, every single time that you do anything here, you have to come here and then do refresh. You see what you've done, all right? I don't want to do that, all right? So I want on how I make any changes immediately I see the effects. And this is why I'm using this plugin, all right? So I've already installed this, so I don't need to go any further doing this, all right? So once you install it, you have it, you see the little icon at the tax bar here. Yeah. So what will happen is I'm going to close this, and then I'm going this particular page, I'm going to like click on go live, and it's going to like do abracadabra and then start a web server for me, all right, for this page. So what this gives us is so let me, because I have this guy on the left and I have the other one on the right. Please don't get confused, please. We are still back to this. So we have HTML and CSS. The rest of the things that I mentioned was just trying to like display this in the browser, all right, and then some fancy stuffs. So to test whether our server is working, we'll just type anything here, CSS grid intro, right? Yeah, you see automatically this guy is going to show here. I don't need to refresh. I add another thing, is going to show, right? Yeah. Okay, so we need to like include CSS in this stuff, and of course, CSS goes to um, several ways to include CSS. One of it is external linking. Yeah, so I'm going to do all, and then say background red, just to test that our CSS is working. Yeah, it's working. So it's properly included and everything is fine. So I'm going to go back and remove this guy. So we are ready to work. Okay, so first of all, what do we want to achieve? Okay, let's first start by, okay, let me just pick any random stuff, all right? Okay, so I'm going to, so we're looking at grid, right? So I'm going to create a div, all right? If we start a project, an actual project in this session, now we are going to like try and focus on semantics, all right? So for now, I'm going to use div to achieve almost everything. Please, when you're working on your code, don't use div to do everything in the code, and God bless you. All right, so we have this item, right? And then what happens is that I'm going to duplicate these guys, 1, 2, 3. Why is this guy doing this? Okay, I can do dot item. I want to like uh, I could have done this times 10, 7, right? Yeah. So I have these 7 items, right? Maybe we can add numbers to it, 1, 2, so that we can differentiate 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so then we have this guy we can call. So what we want to do is we want to test grid, right? So but for now, I want to just give all these guys some basic styling, right? So let's do this. So I gave all of them the same class because I want to like reference all of them once. So class, different items can have the same class, but ID is not the same. So we'll have to have padding, and then I'll do that 20 pics. We've not started grid yet, right? So we just want to give this guy basic stuff to just let it looks nice, more. So padding 20 pics, and then we have border so that we have the boundaries like solid. I don't have like this or this red, so I'm going to use this something like this. Should we give background? Yeah, can give background brown. It's because browns. Then, yeah, we have something like this. Awesome. Now notice, you remember when I said inline versus block elements? All right. So divs by default, you know that we already by default we have a layout here. Very fine layouts. Very fine layouts. All right. So this is the default browser behavior. All right. So divs by default, they occupy the entire space. So if I shrink this guy, you just occupy the entire space. That's div for you, right? Div is one of those block elements. So we have different block elements. Section, I think table. No. Then your letter, you go and Google it. All right. So there are different block elements, and then inline elements like span, a tags and all that. All right. All these guys are inline elements. All right. List is also a block element, whereas the UL is an inline element. All right. So yeah. So by default, all these items, they occupy the same each line, right? So we've added this style just to if we are doing. Now I like to do one page. You see that this page has
Hmm. Niger happened again.
It rained, so network is bad everywhere.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it rained here today too. It snowed earlier and then rained on the snow, so it's very very messy. Like
Yeah.
so messy. The only thing is that it doesn't dirty your shoes anyways, but it's messy to walk.
People are still experiencing snow.
Guy,
Yeah,
guy.
it's so sunny.
I wanted to
Super
come back to
sunny,
Poland.
yeah.
I realized that my team lead went to Poland today. He said it's 17 degrees, and I wanted to just call you and start coming.
Yeah, it's so sunny, yeah, yeah.
Damn, damn. And it's worse at my place of work because my place of work is outside of the city, so the snow there is like this thick.
Weather report
Yeah.
from different
Don't
angle.
worry, if you're in Nigeria, you hardly worry about weather or temperature, but immediately you leave, you be checking temperature every now and then. Mm. So, how are you guys in the class so far?
The class is nice, but I think he delays so much, like to explain a particular thing. I don't think if we're going to be able to cover up all we need to cover up in an hour or even two, if he keep lingering on one thing over and over again.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's one feedback. Any other person?
I'm using my phone. I'm not enjoying it.
Okay. I can imagine. I can imagine. Um. Yeah. I think that what we could do is we also like go over CSS grid again, but I wanted you to see like have an experience of someone else teaching you, right? And also, he just prepared for this. Like I could told him by this time yesterday, no, after the class yesterday, around 10 o'clock, and he was like, "Yes, he will do it." So just have to jump in, and I didn't have much time to prepare for it. I was even surprised that he made a slide. Um, but rest assured, we would go over CSS grid and all these things actually like practice make perfect. And also he started like creating some projects on the terminal which we never did before, and also yeah, trying to tell you like VS Code plugin and all, which we have never done before. So if he doesn't have experience with that, I think he'd be lost. But also don't worry about that, just focus on the things that he's trying to teach, right? um so yeah. Well, it's also that you get like you get an experience for someone else, which I think it's good for a mix up. And yeah, I think while we're waiting for him, I can share my screen and show you people what I'm building. Uh-huh. Entire screen.
I think him teaching us is good too because he details everything. Like he goes to start from the basics, everything.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty nice, right? Because
Yes, but we
um
need to give him more time.
yeah,
Yes.
he knows how to detail something, which I think if it's me, like I would have run over a lot of this thing like in a few minutes, and half of the people would understand. So I even think I would invite him more. So
Yeah, I think he's following, and he tries
yeah,
to start from the background, basic,
and build up.
build. Yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, it's not bad from my end.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I love that. I think every day I'm showing you guys this chess application I'm building. And currently, if you know how to play chess, you would know what I'm working on right now. So I'm trying to like, if you click on a piece, it should tell you like the possible place that a piece can move, right? So for example, if you click on the queen, you see that the queen goes all this way, right? And if you click on the rook, for example, you see possible place that a rook can move. And these are logs on the console. This is actually like showing like the coordinates that the pieces are. And for the bishop, for example, this is how the bishop should move. For yeah, I haven't implemented one for the night, so it won't be clicked. And I think it just went whoa. So there's an error because it's like not yet implemented. So I just yeah, I think it's pretty exciting. But then there's a bug, right? The bug is if I click aha, I think because of that error, it's like my app has died. Oh, it didn't die, but nothing is happening again. Aha, aha. Let's refresh. Let's refresh. The bug is that this, for example, this king is not supposed to be able to move here, but it's highlighted that you can move here, and this is a bug because of a particular thing with integers, find integers, which is very crazy, but it's a story I'll tell you when you guys come up a little bit. But yeah, it's an interesting problem to have. Oh, he's not yet back, and we'll have 1 minute remaining. Do you guys want me to keep telling you the story?
Yeah, please. Let's use to wait for him.
Yeah. So, okay, the story is this way. In low-level programming, there's what we call unsigned integers. So I would just look it up. Unsigned int. So what unsigned int means is that this integer is not signed. What it means, it means that it cannot be minus, right? So it means that it can only be positive, right? From 0 to like the limit of that integer, right? So like for example u8, which is written this way, or unsigned integer 8 in different languages, it means unsigned 8-bit integer, right? um so it goes from the limit of 0 to 255. I think I've discussed this with you guys before, right? So but what is happening is that I'm doing when I'm calculating the position of the possible places for the king, right? I'm doing subtraction, right, to get to this place. If I subtract one, it will give me this place. If I add one, I'll get this place. If I add something like 7, I'll get here. Add something like 8, I'll get here. Add something like 9, I'll get here. Something of the sort. But then I will also I will also try because if, for example, if this king happened to be here, right? Let me move something and click on it. I would also want it to be these places. So I'm also going to deduct for these sides too, which is something like around like -7, -8, and -9 to get these places. But if the king happened to be at back here, right, then those values, because this it starts from 0 here and end at 63. So what is going to happen is that this is going to be it's going to this position is 3. So I'm going to -7 from it, which is going to give me -3 and -4 or something of the sort. But on our coordinates, we have only 0 to 64. So, and remember, I said that this value only goes from 0 to 255. So what happens is that all of them are converted to 0, right? So if you look at here, you see that 0 is locked 3 times, right? Because there are 3 zeros here for those 3 places that are not there. So it rounds them up to 0. And then what happens is that when I click on this, then let me move a value so let me move on so it becomes the term of this. So what happens here is that because all of them are rounded to 0, because you unsigned integers cannot have value less than 0, so the -2, -1, and -3 or something of the sort, all of them will be rounded to 0. That's why you have 3 zeros here for the 3 spaces that is supposed to go above here, right? All of them are rounded to 0, and that means that this coordinate 0 here is now considered to be a valid move, right? And that, my friend, is how you introduce a bug to your code, by just some assumptions you'd make would just sneak in a bug, and you ship it to your customers, and your customers are losing money if it's a bank that you built. Imagine I was building a bank by the side, right? So, but now I know the problem and I could easily fix it. It may not be straightforward anyways, but might make my code more ugly, but I would fix it. Yeah, so that's my story.
Hmm.
Yeah. I'm really glad that you guys were able to like make it to this class today. I think the class should already ended like 3 minutes ago. Let me see the calendar. And I will stop this YouTube live streaming.